How realistic is it, do you think, that Putin would use a tactical nuclear weapon?
Well, I don't think he will, but I think it's irresponsible for him to talk about it. The idea that a world leader of one of the largest nuclear powers in the world says he may use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and the whole point I was making was it could lead to just a horrible outcome. And not because anybody intends to turn it into a world war or anything, but it just, once you use a nuclear weapon, the mistakes that can be made, the miscalculations, who knows what would happen.
Do you think Putin is a rational actor?
I think he is a rational actor who's miscalculated significantly.
So if he's not rational and...
No, I didn't say he's not rational.
You said the speech is what?
I think the speech is...
Okay.
His objectives were not... I think he thought, Jake, I think he thought he was going to be welcomed with open arms. That this has been the home of Mother Russia in Kyiv, and he was going to be welcomed, and I think he just totally miscalculated.
Mr. Biden also told Jake Tapper that Saudi Arabia will face consequences over the decision by OPEC and its allies, including Russia, of course, to slash oil production. Those cuts could raise prices. They certainly did to begin with, although prices are lower at present. Washington says that'll help Russia pay for its war on Ukraine. A bump in prices, of course, is what they meant. Well, some U.S. Democrats are calling for a freeze on arms sales to Riyadh. Senator Richard Blumenthal says that the Saudis have delivered a gut punch that could send the U.S. economy into recession. Mr. Biden says a recession is unlikely, while other lawmakers are joining in calls for Washington to distance itself from Riyadh. After the OPEC Plus announcement last week, Democrat Chris Murphy tweeted that he thought the whole point of selling arms to the Gulf states was that when an international crisis came, the Gulf would choose America over Russia/China. Well, Senator Chris Murphy joins us now from Washington. I just want to play a little bit more, Chris, of what President Biden said on the U.S.-Saudi relationship. Stand by.
I didn't go to one about oil. I went about making sure that we made sure that we weren't going to walk away from the Middle East. We should, and I am, in the process when this House and Senate gets back, they're going to have to. There's going to be some consequences for what they've done.
What do you believe those consequences should be, Chris Murphy?
Listen, I've been arguing for the better part of the last decade that we should reorient our relationship with Saudi Arabia. For a long time, they were a very imperfect ally, and I think we now have to ask ourselves whether they are an ally at all. We have looked the other way when it comes to their human rights abuses, their war in Yemen, because we assumed when the chips were down, when there was a global emergency, the Saudis would choose to support us, not to support the Russians or the Chinese. And so I think when a partner like this turns their back on you, you have to make decisions about whether you want to still be in the same kind of business. We sell a whole lot of arms to the Saudis. We spend a whole lot of money putting troops in and around Saudi Arabia to defend them. We've got Patriot missiles there, Patriot missiles that lots of other countries, including Ukraine, want. I just think it's time for us to, figure out whether there's a better way to deploy our defense assets rather than using them to support a country that doesn't seem to have our interests at heart. I just think that's smart foreign policy.
Let's be quite clear about what the Saudis have said the decision to cut oil production was based on. They say it was based on purely economic reasons. It had no political dimensions. They say the oil market has been up and down for a while, hasn't been working to the fundamentals, and it was time to balance it out. And the irony of all of this, of course, is that oil prices are down at a level below those that it was at before this announcement of the cut, aren't they?
Well, the Saudis can't separate the economics of oil from the politics of oil. They can't do that because it is the economics of oil, it is the revenue from that oil that is allowing the Russians to perpetuate a campaign that is killing thousands of civilians inside of inside of Ukraine. It is the revenue from that oil that has allowed for the Saudis to perpetuate a campaign inside Yemen that has killed thousands of civilians. So, I understand the Saudis want to say, hey, we make all of our decisions with respect to oil independent of the political consequences, but they know that's not true. They know that there is a linkage between the economics of oil and the politics of oil. And they also know that the United States has been an ally for decades with the Saudis because we wanted to make sure that we had the ability to get oil from the Middle East to the United States to power our economy. So we're a security partner with the Saudis in large part because we want to make sure that we protect the oil that is important to our economy. So you just can't separate the economics of oil from the politics of oil. You can't.
But their argument might be that they can't rescue the Democrats ahead of the midterms, and that by cutting oil production, of course, the expectation was that oil prices would rise. In fact, as I point out again, the irony is that those prices are actually lower than they were before.
Yeah, but this isn't about politics in the United States. This is about my constituents, Republicans and Democrats, who can't afford for prices to go back up. This is about people who are dying in Ukraine, funding. This is about oil that is helping to fund a war that violates international norms. So I understand some people want to make this about politics. To me, it's not about politics. It's about stopping an illegal war in Ukraine, and it's about trying to ease the pain at the pump for all sorts of Americans, regardless of their political persuasion.
I want to talk about the war in Ukraine and whether there is any possibility of an off-ramp at this point. Yesterday, we saw the UAE President, Mohammed bin Zayed, visit Vladimir Putin in Russia. This is indeed separate from OPEC, although the UAE, of course, is a member of OPEC. The presidential advisor to the UAE's president, Anwar Gargash, told me, and I quote, "It was a good opportunity to take stock of developments in the war in Ukraine and to underscore the importance of de-escalation." President Biden has repeatedly talked about an off-ramp for Putin. Do you welcome the UAE's mediation efforts?
Not really. I mean, I would much more welcome the UAE's efforts if they weren't siding with the Russians when it comes to the price of oil. The UAE, the Saudis, the Chinese, the Indians, they have the ability to put this conflict on a path towards de-escalation. But that can't happen if they continue to subsidize the war. China's doing that by buying Russia's oil. The UAE and the Saudis are doing that by raising the price of oil, thus increasing the revenues into the Russian treasury. So, there are a lot of people that are profiting off of this war that like to talk a big game about de-escalation, but then when it comes down to it, they're not pursuing policies that are actually putting pressure on Russia to end this war.
But I do want to just pursue this point, because at this stage, it does seem that the channels between the Kremlin, Russia, Vladimir Putin, and G7 members and the West aren't great at present. There are friends of Russia, perhaps erstwhile, going forward, who are getting increasingly concerned about what is going on. Surely the opportunity for any mediation efforts from anybody at this point should be applauded.
Yeah, but let's just be realistic. The UAE is not going to be the country that is going to mediate the end of this conflict, and they are sending very different signals. They're trying to get credit for mediation while they are literally pumping up the price of oil so as to make it easier for Russia to continue the war. So all I'm saying is that you can't have it both ways. If you really want to try to bring this war to a close, then you actually have to put pressure on Russia, and that comes in part through a decrease in the revenue that Russia gets from oil.
I think the UAE probably see their efforts in terms of mediation as a tall order, to be fair, but certainly it's interesting to get your perspective on this. While I've got you, I've got to ask you about Iran. Is there any chance for a potential revival of the JCPOA, given what is happening inside that country with the sort of crackdown from authorities on young women protesting for their rights?
Well, I think the administration, has been very muscular in their support for these protests. Early sanctions of the Iranian leaders that have disappeared, kidnapped and killed many of these protest leaders, working with the tech companies to make sure that communication remains open to the extent possible inside the protest movement. As you know, right now, the negotiations over a nuclear deal are on pause. They likely will be for the foreseeable future. Listen, I remain someone that believes that it is still in the United States' interest, it is still in the world's interest to get an agreement with Iran in which they commit to get as far away from a nuclear weapon as possible. As you are seeing right now in Russia, it makes sense for the United States to pursue policies, even with our enemies like Iran, that keeps them away from a nuclear weapon, because Iran's malevolent activities in the region will be much worse if they are a nuclear power. So right now, I think these negotiations are on pause. Right now, I think the administration's focus is on providing support to the protesters, but I still remain open to an agreement that would restart the JCPOA. I just don't think that's going to happen anytime in the foreseeable future, certainly not in the next few weeks.
Chris Murphy, it's good to get your perspective, sir. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.